So, great to see you all. Welcome to Manchester. A big welcome to you all. A special welcome to the Mayor of the Liverpool City region, to the home of the Premier League champions for the next 5 months at least. I think just take a moment, everyone, to have a little look around the room. It's an incredible gathering, isn't it, that's come together today, isn't it? Really wonderful, isn't it, for us to be hosting you all here. And thanks to everybody, by the way, at Circle Square, Bruntwood, who've given us their facilities today. We really appreciate that support. But to look around the room, obviously to see players, I think played as long as 50s, maybe 60s, certainly some people 70s, right through the decades, to see so many family members here today as well, to see, if you like, the whole of the community represented. And of course, we are here today to see if we can do something together. That's what we're going to try and do, everybody, this afternoon. Steve and I are not going to claim any credit here in terms of the awareness raising that has been done over recent years. You know, we credit people like Chris Sutton, Alan Shearer, Dawn Astle. There's been lots of people who've kind of gone out there and raised the awareness of the issue of brain health and football, and the impact on people in the long run, potentially from playing the game. You know, we've not been there and done that hard work. However, what we do bring to this, Steve and I, is obviously a love of the game. We're steeped in the game, both of us. You've got a red and a blue in front of you. Although I am the Mayor of Greater Manchester, to the great upset of people like Mr. May, who's looking right at me with this. I am an Evertonian. I'll get that out on the table right now. But we've watched the game. We've watched all of you, haven't we, play through the decades. We love the game. All of the strange things that happen in it, even now, we still love it. And you know, we always will, to be honest. We love, and we all do, don't we? We love everything about it. However, we do have something of a track record between us in standing up to things that are wrong in the game. We've stood up to racism in the past. We've stood up against many things in the past. We've stood up for the promotion of the women's game. And let's remember, this is an issue that affects women as well. But particularly, you might remember the work we did together on Hillsborough, when Steve asked me to attend the 20th anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster, when Steve was the Lord Mayor of Liverpool and I was the Culture Secretary in Gordon Brown's government. And you know, we went on something of a journey there. Again, not for us. You know, we weren't doing it for that reason. We just helped put the families where they needed to be to get the justice that they were seeking. And to some degree, we achieved that. And we just want to see now whether we can bring that learning to the benefit of the people in this room, to you, to see if we can go on a similar journey and get a greater degree of justice for people who have built the game into what it is today. And that's, I think, what we can offer here. I'll come to the details later, because when we get to the end, when we've heard from everybody, I think what we're trying to get to today is, can we, between us, kind of bring forward a call and then a plan for a comprehensive solution to this? We hear all the good work that's been done, but it's still in fragments. And what has been done is good, but it doesn't deal with the totality, the enormity of the situation that has faced you individually, faced you as families, but then faced the football community in this country. So what we're trying to get to is that comprehensive solution. But the last thing I will say, just before inviting Steve to say a few words at the start, is, you know, we come today with kind of the starting point that it was, you know, we all celebrate the game today, the global wealth of the game, the impact it has around the world. This game will be nothing if it forgets that it was you that built the game into this. You know, we've got many people in the audience who were the first generation of Premier League players. You know, you were the ones who raised football from where it was in the 80s and into what it started to become in the 90s. But before that, You know, the players who played in decades before that kind of built that love of football in people in this country, and that allegiance that we all have to it. So the game is what it is today because of you. And the game, therefore, has to understand fully its obligations to you and give back. And football does give back, but in this instance, I don't think it's given back enough. And that's what we're going to get on to discuss today. So we start from that point of view. Steve, would you like to say a few words before we invite our first speakers to address the meeting?
Only to associate myself with everything that you just said, and to say it's a genuine honour to be in the room with so many football greats and Peter Reid. There are people here, to tell you the truth, when you were playing against Liverpool at Anfield, I absolutely hated you.
I'm looking at a few right now.
But what you brought to the game should never be forgotten about, as Andy said. And look, we're not experts in neurodegeneration or those conditions, but we do know the parliamentary process. We do know when they put hurdles up against you. Don't forget, families were fighting for 20 years before we started to get somewhere and eventually get to justice. There was never any accountability at Hillsborough because nobody was ever jailed for 97 unlawful deaths. Don't forget, those people were unlawfully killed. But we eventually helped the families and all those campaigners to get through some of those barriers that have been put up against them. And I think that's where we hopefully might be able to help and assist the great work that's already gone on. The foundations of this have been going on for years, and there's some really, really fantastic people who have been behind all of that, and they deserve, as Andy said, all the credit. But it might be that we can just, through the contacts that we've got and through the experiences and through some of the absolute awfulness of what we had to try to achieve, and working cross-party, by the way, not just with our own party colleagues, but we were able to slowly to turn that corner and then to get a way forward for the families. If we can do that, then it'll be an absolute privilege for us to be part of this. But as I say, it's built on the shoulders of giants, of all those people who've done such great work to bring this to the public attention. I mean, I genuinely, I play footy, still play footy now, and absolutely love it. And thanks, Pig. I did you at Anfield. But I absolutely love it. And just because I didn't play at the highest levels, but I was their loss, not mine, but I didn't play at the highest levels and you did, it doesn't mean that we don't understand about those sorts of things that you went through that potentially have contributed to the condition that we see so many of those former greats from clubs right the way across the whole country. But if I can talk about mine, my Liverpool Football Club, I just look at some of the lads that I'm meeting now who were playing when I was, watching them as gods on the pitch, who some of them are a shell of what they used to be. And surely there's something that is the common thread. There's commonality between all of this. And that's what we need to get to, isn't it? And then to obviously help and assist those people who need it, but hopefully to prevent other people from going through what people too often have had to go through. So that's the bit I think that we can add.
Yeah, absolutely is. Martin Dobson's here. I remember watching Martin in the 70s. Francesca, Mick Lyons' daughter's here. We remember those things, don't we? You remember the players you fell in love with. I do as well. And I think everyone wants to see right done by those people and everyone in this room. Just a final word as to where this meeting came from. David May came to see me with Michael Giles and, of course, John Stiles as well, who've obviously been at the forefront of Football Families for Justice. And we then discussed that between us. Could Steve and I bring something to this that helps take it from where it's at to that higher level and towards a solution. And that's what this meeting was about. But it was very much prompted by the three gentlemen I've just mentioned. So to get the meeting going, John, I'm going to invite you to address it. John Styles, everybody.
No need for a round of applause. You've got a microphone.
Oh, sorry, I've just switched that off. Make sure you switch it on. I've just switched it off.
Thank you, and everybody for coming. I know I've been mithering you all, but it's great to see such a fantastic turnout. Excuse me. Come on. I'd like to thank Andy and Steve for putting this on today. Imogen and Saba, who've done a magnificent job. Absolutely fantastic. They do deserve a round of applause, everybody. I'd like to thank all the members of the Football Families for Justice, especially those who are here today and those who haven't been able to make it. I think the amount of people here is it indicates the concern and anger of the football community about what is not being done for our players, who've been through, as the lad said, who basically made the game what it is. Everybody remembers my dad dancing around in 1966 with the World Cup. He started losing his memory when he was 60, maybe even earlier, late 50s. It went on for a long time. When Dad died, we donated his brain to Professor Willie Stewart. Whilst Dad was poorly, somebody had told me about this CTE. Willie examined my father's brain, and my dad was told he had vascular dementia and he also had Alzheimer's. Willie examined his brain. He had neither. The disease that killed my father is CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, caused by head impacts. Every time you have a head impact, tau protein breaks off the brain. If you don't have another impact, it settles down. Footballers don't. There's many in here who've headed tens of thousands of footballs. And that's what killed him. And I believe this is just the start of the CTE iceberg that's coming our way in contact sports, and particularly in football. The NFL footballers get it. Anybody who has head impacts. We know that heading killed my dad. And the group in our Football Families for Justice, every single family has donated the brain. It's been CTE that's killed them. I believe it's killed thousands of footballers. The football industry is awash with cash. And this year, for example, £10.6 billion will go to the Premier League. It's nothing to them to sort this out. In my dad's team of the 1966, 5 of them died of dementia. That's well above the national average. His 68 team, 5 of those died of dementia. Tony Dunn, Bill Folkes, Bobby Charlton, David Hurd, Dennis Laws got dementia. When Tony Dunn went back to Old Trafford, he said, this is what has made my head hurt. That's what he said. There is no doubt in my mind that CTE is going to become more and more prevalent and more obvious. It isn't really rocket science. If you have thousands and thousands of head impacts, you've got a very good chance you're going to get CTE. So when Dad died, we started campaigning. It's 4 years ago now, and it's a very simple thing that we want. We want a properly financed care fund that will take care that players will know, even the players who are here today will know that if they get ill with dementia, they will be cared for. There needs to be a care plan. And that is the most important thing of all. Now, I'll just go back a minute. We're talking about players from my dad's era, and everybody thinks, oh, that's ages ago. David May was on the television with me this morning, and he spoke to Dean Windass yesterday. Dean Windass is 55. He went for a scan. He went to be examined, and he was told that he's got level 2 of dementia, and he's 55 years old. He can't be on his own. This is, like I say, anybody who's headed the ball that many times. We need a proper care fund. They've produced a care fund of £1 million. My dad's care was over £100,000 a year. £1 million won't even take care of 12 families' care home costs. And it's the care home costs that are the big concern. Families have had to sell their homes. The The care home costs are formidable, and families ring me up and they say, if he goes into a care home, I don't know what we're going to do. We were lucky that my dad had some medals to sell. Without those medals, I don't know what my family would have done. And that's what families say to me. If he goes into a care home, we don't know what they're going to do. Earlier, obviously, we mentioned earlier, we want to protect the current players. So I wrote in 2021 to all 92 league clubs and the Women's Super League clubs. And I told them that Professor Willie Stewart and I, who is the leader in the field in the world, would come and talk to the players. We've not been allowed to get in anywhere. Football does not want to deal with this, but they're going to have to deal with it because it's not going away. I also got thrown out of Doncaster Rovers training ground for giving out leaflets. I'm the first Leeds United substitute ever to be substituted. And I was also thrown out of Doncaster Rovers training ground, so that's a bit of history. I was also approached by the PFA to join the payroll and go on and help families. Of course, I declined. It would be totally hypocritical of me. I believed that there needed to be an independent voice that would speak out about what's going on. We also are very lucky that we have the support of the Football Supporters Association, who are right behind us. One of the reasons why I couldn't join the PFA is because I believe the PFA, when it comes to dementia, is morally bankrupt, and they are ignoring what's happening. It's shocking that this hasn't been addressed. The PFA charity, I don't really like to quote them, but they actually estimate that there's 55,000 ex-players in England. The PFA charity, even they said they expect around 16,000 players out of that amount to get dementia. Again, well above the national averages. This is a brain disease epidemic. The current fund, I'm not here to go on and on about the PFA today, but the current fund that was created in 2023, I believe, is not fit for purpose. You can talk to Chris Nichols' family. They filled in all the forms. They went through all the processes. They never got a penny. There are other families like the Kinnears and the McNamee families who went through the same thing. The McNamee family were told they wouldn't have to sell their house, and they did. They had to sell their house. We've also got other current players who are suffering. Tony Parks, who we're going to hear from Natalie shortly, and many, many others. Like I say, there's £10.6 billion. The £200 million from football's so wealthy. They could sort this out tomorrow. They could sort it out tomorrow. But we've got nowhere near getting that. And I'm so grateful that these gentlemen are going to take it on to another level. In conclusion, the existing fund is not fit for purpose, particularly when people go into care homes. And there is no help for widows, which there should be. I believe the current fund is a PR exercise to avoid the expense of long-term costs. These families that we primarily help were before the age of the Premier League and are not wealthy. It's scandalous that players are having to rely on the NHS and social care. This is football's problem. Football should be paying for it, not the NHS and not the taxpayer. Many, I believe the industry knows what's happening and are allowing many players to deliberately die without help so as to save money. I know this isn't necessarily the most cheerful thing, but this is a very serious subject. Once again, we have to fight for this because nobody else is going to do it. We have to. There's never been a gathering like this of players, I don't know, since maybe 1962 with the maximum wage. I'm so grateful for all of you for coming today. I really am. And I'd just like to thank Steve and Andy for taking this on. We keep fighting. We're not going to stop. Thank you.
Peter, I don't know how you follow that, but can you try? Thank you.
Well, he's nicked a few of my points, but now listen, I played the game, and by the way, the game didn't start with the inception of the Premier League. It was way before that. See some of the lads there, Alex Stepney. Sammy, Mark, Stuart, great players. But let me cut to the chase. You need to mention the money in the game now. Transfer fees of over 200 million have been paid out over the years. Just let that sink in. Transfer fees. One player going to another club, 200 million. I'm not going on about agents' fees on this. I won't. It'd be remiss of me. But this money should be channeled to players who've got CTE, and more importantly for me, families who live with it. That's a big thing. Frank Worthington, the great Frank Worthington, Roy Greaves, team I played in, the Bolton Wanderers, many years ago. Tony Dunn, Tony, left back. Peter Thompson, left winger, another one. All these lads have suffered, and their families. I remember when I was a kid, training at Bolton, and I used to have this big Casey hanging from the wall. All the lads used to run up, jump, and hit it. Thank God I was 5'7" because I could never reach the thing. But this all affects it. This all affects it. The bottom line is the money in football, Premier League, Football Association, Football League, PFA. I'm glad Andy and Steve have come. And obviously, we've got to get to Parliament. But these should be lobbied, these institutions. And I know John mentioned the £1 million, that PFA fund. Let's get it right, it's not. It's absolutely not. In fact, it's embarrassing. So we've got to cut to the chase. We've got to get after them. And with great respect to politicians, and you know I love you, Sue, and sometimes it takes too long in Parliament. And I've been down there and I've listened to it. So we've got to get together, galvanise, and get this done. If the football associations and the football Premier League don't do it, we've got to get in there, Parliament, lobby, and get it done. Because the most important thing is the health and care of the players who are struggling. But help the families, because it is brutal. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Peter. Thank you. Thanks so much for those powerful words. And you mentioned MPs. I just want to make sure that the room is aware that we do have the Member of Parliament for Oldham, East and Saddleworth with us today, Debbie Abrahams, and we're going to come back to the sort of parliamentary side of this towards the end. But thank you for coming. I know your MP, Peter, Phil Brickell, was very supportive, wanted to be here, couldn't be here, and we have had a lot of support from Northwest MPs. So we'll pick that up in the final stage of the meeting. But I was talking about people who made my childhood. I'm now going to introduce one of those who ruined my childhood, alongside Mr. Molby, Jim Beglin. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Mine is a shorter and sharper role, hopefully. I'm going to read a letter from Jane Nicholl, who is the wife of Chris Nicholl, sent to the PFA's Brain Health Fund shortly after Chris had passed away in February of last year. The family filled in all the forms, as John referred to earlier, and were promised help, but it never came. Since then, nothing has changed, and this is why we want a robust and properly financed fund in support of all suffering former players and their loved ones. This is what Jane wrote. Congratulations. Chris has died without the fund having to pay a penny. You gave us hope that the time he had left would be spent in a more pleasant environment than the dreary care home social services had forced him into. I'm sure his decline was partly due to the lack of stimulation and exercise there. The residents were just herded into the lounge in front of the television. Visits from family and friends were also reduced because of the distance involved. This was hard on him and on us. I am currently very, very angry that Chris died with absolutely no help nor support from the fund. His last few months could have been made so much better for him and his family if you had actually lived up to your promise. You failed him, and you should be ashamed. This is not the end as far as we are concerned. We will be joining forces with the growing number of families who feel completely let down. And now just back to me again. Unfortunately, this is an all too common experience for former players and their families. It simply has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And if you would pass all of our love and best wishes to the Nicol family, if you would. It's such a powerful testimony that you've just read out today. And I, looking around the room and seeing the reactions in people's faces as we respond to what we're hearing, the emotion here is huge, isn't it? And I bet you're all feeling it in one way or another, remembering people that you played with, people that you know, their wives, their kids, their families. So this is part of it, though, isn't it? Really getting to the heart of how deep this issue runs, and hence then having a solution that's equal to the scale of what people have lived through. I didn't want to go much further on from here without just saying to the room, because we're going to hear from kind of family from a bit later on, but for players in the room, if there was anybody who wanted to say anything at this point, having heard what we've heard, I know it's kind of hard, isn't it, just to kind of process it all, really, the enormity of it. But if there was, we're going to pause here slightly to say that there is a moment for a question to any of our, quite frankly, unbelievable speakers that we've just heard, each and every one of them in their own way. Really, it left the room completely listening, hanging on every word. If there was a question, a comment, or if anybody wanted to reference a friend or a colleague in any way, this is a good moment to do that. So Imogen, would you mind if this microphone goes around the room and if people would just introduce themselves and make their contribution? Thanks.
Hi, my name's Tom Graham. I'm Arthur Graham's brother. A lot of you probably know Arthur. Just go back to the point John made when you said you wrote to all the Premier League, all the clubs in English football leagues. Could we not put a wee bit of pressure on the PFA representative for all these clubs to maybe get everybody what's aware of what's going on and what's happening and do something that way?
I've got to be honest, I've sort of lost hope with the PFA, to be honest with you. I'll just briefly tell you a little. So when Maheta Malango took over the PFA in 2021, I had a meeting with him and Judith Gates and a lad called John Massinho. And at that meeting, he said, what we need is the X. We need the X to find out how many players have got it. And then we can go to the authorities and say, we need this. He said he would tender it out to 3 different actuarial firms. He never did. It never happened. All they did was a cat-handed thing on the internet where if you're a player, scan this QR code. Even now, the PFA don't know how many players have got dementia. And it's not that difficult. They could have appointed an actuarial firm to go out and seek out all these players. So when you say to me, can we go to the PFA as that, I don't really see them as part of the solution. I see it has to be us that do it. I've been there, I've talked to them, tried my best, but I believe that we have to do it because I don't think they've got the appetite to do it. So that's just my opinion. But just on that one, Tom, that's the way I see that one. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Just looking around the room, I should have said, Debbie, you're chair of the all-party parliamentary group on dementia, aren't you? So you do have a big role, hopefully, to and a former director of public health in your past. So, colleague on the second row, if I could just, it's Tony, isn't it?
One of my questions is, there's a lot of emotion attached to, by the way, I'm not involved in the football world at all. I'm an Arsenal supporter for many years, but apart from that, I'm not an ex-anything in football. I am an ex-lawyer. I'm qualified as a lawyer. My question is, if you put the emotion to one side, the contracts that these gentlemen had were with football clubs. I know it might be difficult, but it's the football clubs ultimately who should have the contractual obligation regarding the health and safety of their employees. And I think there are many things going around in my mind at the moment, but one of them is how your organization actually approaches this. And are you actually going after the right people?
Yeah, well, we're going after the right people because the clubs you can't get at. As a matter of fact, I can't really talk too much about it because there is a legal issue already. And it's always nice to have a solicitor in the room who's going to beef the day up for us. Thanks very much. But yeah, that's already ongoing. The issue about the clubs are all together in one group. So you're right about it's got to be the clubs and all the rest of it, but that is probably for another day and not today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, John. Any other indication at this point? Yep, the gentleman there. I'll just hand you the mic. We'll move on in a second, if that's all right.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is the right point to make, but my name is Paul Cooper. I'm a neurologist in Greater Manchester. The first point I should make is that as neurologists, we were aware of this issue many years ago, as I've put to meetings before here, and we wrote to the FA back in the 90s explaining it. But the other point which I think is important to bring out is it's not just CTE, it's not just dementia. You've got to think of the Ray Kennedys of this world. Parkinson's disease is very much more common in this population, and some dreadful diseases, including motor neurone disease. So it's important that you don't remain focused on just on dementia, because there are other equally devastating, in fact, more devastating disorders that can also result from repetitive head injuries.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. What I would say is, like, as I've said to you before, the people in our group, every single brain that's been donated has had CTE in it. But I take your point about the MND and about the Parkinson's. Yeah, thank you.
Forgive my ignorance, just it was just on that point. Can CTE lead to those other conditions, or does CTE only lead to
CTE is a process mainly within the outer parts of the brain that will lead to a particular type of dementia. Parkinson's disease is due to problems deeper down within the brain. Ray Kennedy is probably not the only, but one of the better known people who developed Parkinson's disease, possibly as a result of this. Willie Stewart has identified higher levels of motor neuron disease, and that's probably a disease of the spinal cord from within the neck. So that may be a different process. But it's well known that motor neuron disease is seen in rugby players. There's been,
impact sports.
It's and it's also higher incidence in footballers.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
I was at a dinner, M&D dinner at Old Trafford not so long ago, and the professor spoke at that, and she did mention that the fitter you are as an athlete, the more chance you've got of getting it. And I couldn't quite comprehend that. It was an amazing statement, but there you go. And when you look at some of the lads, like we all know Doddy Ware and Burrows, Marcus Stewart, who got it. Is that another thing now we've got? Sure. But obviously with CT is very, very important as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. A really important contribution. And it actually leads us into the next section of the afternoon, because you mentioned Dr. William Stewart. And what we have now is a video from Dr. Stewart, and then a couple of other videos to play to you. So if I could thank John, Peter, and Jim, and ask them maybe to join the audience, and Steve and I will come to the front as well, because I think we're going to drop the lights, Imogen, aren't we? And Saba, and play the videos.
Hi, it's Chris Sutton here. My dad, Mike, passed away 4 years ago. He died because of heading a football. He had dementia, and he suffered horrendously. At the end, it was very upsetting for all of our family. And I'm sending this message on behalf of my family and all the other families out there of ex-players who have suffered and died in the most unimaginable manner. and the ex-players who are still suffering, and the lack of support which they have been getting from the footballing authorities, and the lack of support the families have been getting. Let's hope that with this group garnering support, that things actually start to change, because the footballing authorities have done nowhere near enough. I won't hold my breath, but fingers crossed that that the ex-players and their families start getting the support that they deserve from the game.
Hi everyone, it's David Beckham here. As a young player at Manchester United, I was privileged to be guided and mentored by Eric Harrison, Nobby Stiles and my dad's hero, Sir Bobby Charlton. Like thousands of ex-players, all three tragically died from neurodegenerative diseases such as dementia. I want to add my support to the work of John Stiles and the Football Families for Justice in their campaign to meet the needs of those affected. We need the football family to come together and allocate resources to help address the tragedy of these devastating diseases. Let's ensure that victims and their families are treated with kindness, respect, and best-in-class support. I hope that you will all join us in ensuring a better future for our former colleagues, the many ex-professional footballers who have brought so much joy to so many fans, and for their loved ones. Thank you.
Hello there. My name's Professor Willie Stewart. I'm a neuropathologist in Glasgow, and I'm really sorry I can't be there to join you today, but occasionally my NHS commitments remind me that I have a job to do outside of research. And so John has asked me just to provide a few slides and some background to the challenge that we're facing today. So really, what we're talking about is a problem which I think many of us will recognise from the headlines, where former footballers and more recently rugby players have been identified with a problem related to dementia syndromes, and raising questions about whether this is an issue across the sport, across many sports, and what sports might be able to do and what society might be able to do to prevent it. But really, this is a problem that dates back not just the last 20 years when we've more recently been focusing on it, but a problem that we've recognised for over 100 years. And back then, until recently, we saw this as a problem exclusively for boxers. So we recognised that people who participated in boxing and had long careers in boxing had later life problems with their brain health, with dementia, with other problems. And we described this as a purely boxer's problem. And we gave it boxer's terminology, so we called it punch-drunk syndrome or dementia pugilistic of boxer's dementia. But this changed just 20 years ago now, when colleagues in America started to recognise that former American footballers, in this case, the index case, Mike Webster from Pittsburgh Steelers, had a pathology in their brain at death, which looked essentially very similar to this dementia pugilistica, this boxer's dementia, but they weren't boxers, these were other athletes. And so the term chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, came into use more widely to represent this pathology appearing in not boxers, but in wider athletes. And having recognised then 20 years ago that it wasn't just a problem of boxers, we as a community got out into our mortuaries and started looking more closely to see where we could see this other than in boxers. And when we did so, what we found was that actually this CTE pathology, this chronic traumatic encephalopathy pathology, was there in a number of circumstances outside of boxing. But the one thing that united all of these was that they were individuals exposed to brain trauma, repetitive head impacts, and typically multiple episodes. And so this was people like American footballers, rugby players, people involved in assaults, domestic violence. So basically, the one thing uniting all of these different individuals was their exposure to head injury and head impacts. And as time has gone on, we began to kind of gather more experience in this, and this shows us the earliest evolution of the case. So this is a young man who died at age 23 some years ago, who was a high-level rugby player. And when we get the opportunity to examine his brain, what we found was that he had little spots of this pathology, this CTE pathology in his brain. Not much, just a few foci, but enough to say this pathology was beginning already at 23. So there's evidence that this isn't a pathology which is just evolving and just presenting in people in their 60s and 70s as dementia, but actually it's beginning when people are still participating in sport as small foci of disease, but over time, over 40 years or so, this spreads through the brain and develops into a dementia syndrome that we recognise later in life. Okay, so that's the pathology side of this story. But some might say, well, okay, that's pathology. It's interesting, it's unique, it's different. But does it really mean anything in terms of disease? Does it really mean that footballers or rugby players or others are at higher risk of dementia or other diseases, or is it just an unusual pathology that they develop in their brain? So around about 5 years ago now, we examined this in former professional footballers. We looked at Scottish professional footballers, around 8,000 of them, and compared them to 23,000 people in the population who were born in the same years, were men, living in much the same areas. And we looked at death certification data. And this is the first demonstration that actually these athletes, these former footballers, the people that we've been watching for all these years, may have a problem with brain health later in life. And what we found was that the risk of a death due to what we call neurodegenerative disease, that's dementias and other syndrome, was about 3.5 times higher in footballers than you'd expect. That's quite a dramatic increase over population. That was 3.5 times higher than expected. And actually, when we look at individual disease types, so within this neurodegenerative disease category, these individual disease types, we found that Alzheimer's disease risk, for instance, was 5-fold higher than we'd expect, motor neuron disease 4-fold higher, and a doubling of Parkinson's disease. So there's the first real demonstration that there is a very significant problem in former footballers. And we see similar things when we look at former rugby players. Going further than that, looking beyond just the data on death, but actually looking at factors within football which might be contributing to this, we looked at the risk depending on which position you played on the park. Now, goalkeepers, as you probably appreciate, don't head the ball, don't suffer as many head injuries as people out in the rest of the pitch. And what we found when we look at data in goalkeepers is that their risk was pretty much the same as the general population. So in other words, people who weren't exposed to head injury, head impact had similar risks to the general population. In contrast, though, when you look at the outfield players who are heading as part of the game, what we found is that defenders, highest force headers, most frequent headers, had a risk that was about 5 times higher than we'd expect. Forwards about 3-fold higher. And going further than that, we looked at how long people were playing the sport, how long they were exposed to head injury and head impact. And we find that the longer you're participating in sport, the greater your risk of developing neurodegenerative disease later in your life. And actually, when we look at the pathology, the story is very much the same. The longer you participate in rugby, for instance, the greater your risk of developing CTE pathology. So these two things seem to go hand in hand. And importantly, people talk about changes in technology, changes in the ball, for instance, over the last century. But when we look across the whole of the last century, the risk is much the same, whether you're playing in the early part of the last century or right up until the end of the 2000s. And just before Christmas, we published a paper which actually addressed one of the questions that comes up frequently is that, okay, we've demonstrated that former footballers have a risk of dementia. We've demonstrated this pathology in their brain, but how do we know it's not something else that's contributing to it? And we know there are other risk factors for dementia, things like high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, obesity, alcohol, etc. And so we looked at these, and then by now we're looking at 12,000 former Scottish footballers and about 36,000 controls, so very, very large populations of data we're looking at. I've looked across the electronic health records for all these other risk factors. And basically what we found, the short story here, is that our former footballers, by and large, were healthy men. So the rates of these other risk factors were very much lower than we see in the general population. But more than that, when you look at the risk of these risk factors, the association of these risk factors with dementia, we find that actually they get far lower association with dementia. In other words, blood pressure is less of a problem in relation to dementia among footballers than we'd expect in the population. So in other words, footballers, by and large, should be healthy, should have lower levels of dementia. But when we look at the data, they've got very much higher levels of dementia. There's something in the game, a risk in the game, repetitive head injuries that's causing this problem. Now, when we discuss this frequently with sport and with others, we hear this well, how could this part of the game, heading a ball, tackling in rugby, these other impacts that we see in sport, how could they possibly lead to long-term health problems? How is that possible? Well, if we flip this and look at another part of the body and talk about knees, here's a knee joint that we discuss frequently. And if you talk about former footballers and knees, John will tell you his knees are shot, and everybody accepts that. Former footballers, repetitive impacts, repetitive injuries develop degenerative disease in their knees. Everybody accepts that, and it's a career-ending injury for many footballers. Knees are very much more simple than brains, and essentially what we're seeing is a similar phenomenon. Repetitive impacts, repetitive injuries of the brain are leading to long-term degenerative pathologies. Okay, the brain is a much more complex organ than the knee. Why shouldn't we expect problems to be there as well? The difference between knees and brains is that we can replace a knee. Very simple. Let's put a new knee in, carry on. We can't replace a brain. Once it's gone, it's gone. So what we're seeing then is this very unique pathology associated with head injury and head impacts, which has turned up in former athletes from across a number of different sports. And this is linked to or associated with very much higher risk of neurodegenerative disease, which seems to track to exposure to head impacts. Now, what are we going to do about that? Well, one answer might be, let's give former footballers drugs that might prevent or treat their dementia. Well, in fact, over 100 years of research on Alzheimer's disease, we really have no drugs which are effective at all. Some of them, you'll have heard in the last year or so, are producing minor changes, but actually the cost of those drugs versus the benefit is very minimal. So what we need to do is try and prevent this disease. Now, this is, unlike other dementias, this is one that could be entirely preventable. When we see very clearly it's associated with head injury and head impact. So let's just deal with head injuries and head impacts in sport, and we could prevent this disease from happening. And actually, when you break this down and look at former athletes, former footballers, for instance, that gives us the strategies that we might approach. So one of them is primary prevention. Let's look at current players, current athletes, and say, what can we do to reduce their risk? How do we get rid of as much head injury and head impact in sport as possible and reduce the risk? Later in life, towards the end of life, where they may well have developed a dementia syndrome, I'm afraid there's no real magic drug that we have at the moment. But what we need to do is recognise these individuals with disease and do something to support and care for them and look after them. And then there's a bit in the middle, the people who are no longer playing the game and who haven't yet perhaps developed symptoms. And what can we do to try and reduce their risk? Now, traditionally what we'd say is we'd work on these other modifiable risk factors, but we know that footballers by and large are healthy. So this is going to be a challenge for us. Maybe some of the fancy drugs we've been talking about could be important here, but we don't know yet. So that's the challenge that faces us. Sport is doing quite a lot in approaching the challenge of primary prevention. So football at grassroots and into professional level is talking about reducing head impact exposure as much as possible, talking about better management of head injuries. Rugby is looking at strategies to reduce the tackle height. I will say that neither of those are necessarily changing much in terms of what we're seeing for risk in the future, but it's a start. And actually, we need the whole global sports to get behind this now as well, not just English football, English rugby, Scottish football, Scottish rugby. We need global sport to get behind this. But I think the big problem we have is that while we recognise the pathology and we recognise the population challenge, we had a bit of sluggishness over the policy. Going back to that, everybody accepts problems with knees. We're having difficulty convincing people that repeatedly injuring your brain leads to lifelong health problems for your brain. So I think that's the challenge. We need to push people past that resistance and get them behind strategies to try and better manage this risk, so reduce head impacts as much as possible. But importantly, there's generations of footballers and rugby players who are currently living with this problem. What are we doing to support them? Where is the support, the financial support, the care support that's required for them? This is an industrial disease. These professional athletes are playing a sport, participating in an industry where part of that industry has led to their long-term health being affected. We should be supporting it in much the same way as we do with other industrial diseases. The sport society should be getting behind supporting these individuals. Thank you.
Well, I think that was really helpful. There was a phrase I latched on. I just nudged Steve when I heard Dr. Stewart say it. this is an industrial disease. I think we need to latch on to that statement from Dr. Stewart, because it needs to be talked about in those terms. Because when you do talk about it in those terms, you then start to understand it more, as though it's not just a random thing. It happened because of the profession that people had. And then it, in the end, will bring a different response. And I was, you might remember, a former MP. I was the Member of Parliament for Lee for 16 years before becoming Mayor of Greater Manchester. Lee is a coal mining area. And we had to fight hard to get the coal health compensation scheme. Very hard. Debbie's nodding because it was a big battle, wasn't it? And I had the heartbreaking experience in my surgeries on a Friday of fellas coming in with 2 oxygen bottles. And that was the early years of my life as an MP. And eventually, you know, the coal health compensation scheme came through and they began to get the support. But it took a long time for people to understand what the coal mining industry had done and the help. And it was too late, if we're honest. It didn't come soon enough for those poor fellas as they were struggling. It all hinged on what they call, lawyers, Tony might know, the date of guilty knowledge. When did everyone know there was a problem? And when they had that knowledge, what did they do to protect people? And that's the basis for a scheme. When you kind of have the knowledge, but then perhaps you didn't share that, that creates the legal basis, I think, for a scheme. And I think we do need to think about this as an in that sense that Dr. Stewart just said. So Peter Reid said something fundamentally important when he spoke, which is that while we all think about the players that loom large in our memories and the great things that you did that we celebrate still, Peter was absolutely right to say it's the families who live with this day in, day out. And I'm speaking to somebody whose dad has Alzheimer's, and we're on that journey at this moment in time, and just understanding that. And I see that impact on my mum, and it's a big thing, Peter, and you've helped my dad, and we will forever be grateful for that. But it's a hard thing for families to have to sort of deal with, and they need every little bit of help that they can possibly get. And it is really important, I think, at this moment in this discussion today, we do ask, and it's, to be honest, a brave thing for them to do, to step forward. But if I could ask Vanessa McLeod, Natalie Parks-Thompson, and Russ Kinnear to come forward to come up to the front in the same way that the colleagues.
Just for the change, Christine Gilliver's going to speak instead of Russ Kinnear.
Oh, Christine. So, Christine, you're welcome to come forward, and the other colleagues as well that I just mentioned, because now we're going to hear your testimony. And I know it's a difficult thing to do, but we salute you in doing it. Do you want to come forward to the chairs? Yep. And take a seat, and if you'd rather speak from the seat or wherever's best for you. Christine, over to you.
My name's Chris Gilliver. I'm married to Alan Gilliver. Gilly, we all called him Gilly. I met him in 1986, and we've been married for 30 years this year, but he doesn't know me anymore. He was first started with memory problems in 2008, and then we actually had to fight for a diagnosis because they said he was too young. So we got the diagnosis in 2011, and it was vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. Neither of us sort of associated it with football, but my Gilly was a big centre forward, 6'2". All his pictures are of him up here, like, and I know from him telling me about training that they played head tennis, and I think Peter mentioned something about like a medicine ball on a string. Oh, but it was a heavy ball, and they used to have to head that. They played head tennis, and he headed a ball against a wall to strengthen his neck muscles. And then he had to go back for other like set pieces, heading in, because he was a striker, centre forward, into the corner or wherever. And that was the training methods in those years. He started at Huddersfield in 1966 as 64, as a 15-year-old. And then he went to Blackburn, and he's played at Rotherham, Lincoln, Bradford City, Brighton. And he finished playing in America. And then his life was football, because he became eventually stadium manager at Valley Parade, Bradford City. Now, I asked for some help in 2016 because Gilly had to have a knee replacement, and our club orthopaedic surgeon at the time saw us and said, ring the PFA. So I rang them, and they said, no, there's no help for knee replacements. We might be giving you some physio. So I mentioned to them about dementia. And they said that they'd started up a trial with young footballers going up to the age of like 29, but it was very hard to follow it because a lot of those players didn't make it in football. So I said, well, what about players of my husband's era, my husband's age? And they said, well, we don't know who they are. And I said, well, why not? It's because the records aren't. I said, yeah, but they're in a pension fund. Most clubs have like an ex-players association, and I can't remember who mentioned it, but why the hell didn't they just get them together and a little team to collate them, all the players? Because who knows who's got dementia? You mean, I'm a woman, I don't read the back pages. I'm not sorry. Some women do read the back pages of the Mail and stuff like that. I don't. So what's the point of putting something about dementia and asking for help on the back pages when your husband can't read, like mine? When your husband doesn't know what's wrong with him? When your husband is angry that he has you up against a wall by the throat trying to strangle you because he's like God knows what, and then you escape and you go sit in the car and cry, and you come back in and he goes, "You're putting kettle on, love?" You know, I had a safe room because my husband, my lovely, lovely, gorgeous Gilly, life and soul and everything, was an angry, angry man. That was, I think, frustration. I don't know. But football made him into that person. He was a nightmare in the car, tried to get out, going too fast. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing the other. And I really did struggle big time because I was ill. I had trigeminal neuralgia, and it was very, very painful. And my son and my daughter took time off work to look after me, but I'm still looking after Gilly. It became incontinent, so we had a downstairs toilet put in. I couldn't get him out of the bath anymore. I spent thousands on bath aids and stuff like that, but he couldn't understand the instructions of how to get out of the bath. And he loved his baths, so I took it out and put a wet room in, and he didn't even bloody notice. Didn't notice the bath had gone. And I read something in the Daily Mail about this 7-point dementia charter. And in the sort of column inches at the side of it, it said that they've done this, 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 and this. And I thought, no, they haven't. They've not. Nobody's said that there was this help, home adaptations, this respite. I had no respite. The adaptations that we had in our home, we paid thousands for out of our savings. The grab rails the council did and stuff like that. But we paid for it ourselves because I didn't know. And I was the one running everything because he couldn't. He couldn't even make a cup of tea. He couldn't, what do you want to eat, Gilly? Oh, jam and toast, red jam. My cupboard was full of jars of red jam after he went into care. But anyway, by ringing up, I got a week of respite. And I think that saved my life. We found a lovely care home. They don't help you. They send you a book. Looked at 20 odd. I found one for him and it was lovely. And then it was a week of respite every 2 months. And Dawn Astle, bless her, she was part of my support network before she went to work for the PFA. She still is. She's a good friend. And she said, that's not enough. She got me a week a month. Now, respite, where Gilly is, my husband, it's 1,050 a week. So the PFA did pay for 18 weeks of respite over 2 years, which £18,000, 18 weeks over 2 years, you work it out. You are lifting and shifting a 17-stone man, 6'2", who's incontinent. You're changing his pull-ups. You are wiping his bottom. You are changing the sheets. You are doing things that if he knew what was happening to him, he'd be mortified. He'd be absolutely mortified. And I lost my Gilly. I lost my husband to football. Football was his life. Football took his life. And the PFA should put their hands up and acknowledge that. It's not fair. They've got billions. We've hardly got any money left because his pension and his annuities and everything go towards his care. I'm lucky I don't have to pay top-up fees. If I did, I'd be stuffed, to be honest. But we manage. And I haven't asked for any help in that way. I haven't. But the respite did save my life, to be honest. It gave me time to breathe. And we had a massive angina attack a couple of years ago, and I ended up in hospital. And the kids said, enough's enough, Mum. You've been talking for 6 months, for years, to get him assessed. And you kept saying, next 6 months, next 6 months. And they said, that's it, he's been assessed. So they actually, and I said, I'll do it when I come home. No, he's in care now, Mum. So they took him to where he'd been in care. And normally it's a 4-week assessment period with a free bed thing. 4 days later, I get a call saying he's not coming home because they've assessed him as needing more care that you can provide at home. So that cost us £4,000 out of our savings. And when I spoke to the PFA about the week of respite that I had booked before I had the angina attack, they went, oh, it stopped. I went, but you didn't tell me. You never said anything. Well, it's not available anymore. We're not doing it anymore. But we will find you a care home within your local council's remit. And I said, don't bother. I found one. But that's what I got. They didn't tell us. They never said anything. Not a thing. And then I got some really snotty letters from Brendan Batson about what we'd had or what we'd not had. And he said, you've had £18,552.63. Very specific. And then he argued with me about my conversation with Victoria White at the PFA, because he said, you said you were grateful, your tone's changed. And I said, I was grateful. I was so grateful. But I wasn't grateful when you stopped it. You didn't tell me. You know, you left us in limbo. You just never said anything at all. And it's Gilly's deterioration was sort of like, it went really bad when COVID hit, and we were isolated with nobody to talk to. It was just me and him, and I'm trying to keep him stimulated. Before we got the stair lift, I was pushing him upstairs on his bum, and he was sliding back, up his back, and he was sliding down on his bottom. But I knew to fight with the continence team to get the right pads. You had to fight with the council to get adaptations. And that somebody's just said about the billions of pounds that they're getting. Why can't they share it with us? You know, my Gilly's in a care home now. He doesn't know me, doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know the kids, he doesn't know our grandchildren. And when I see that man who was so vibrant and so larger than life, I do know there are people in this room that know him and have maybe played with him or worked with him. So you know what my Gilly was like. He was really, really the centre of attention. And he just sits there now. He just sits there. And like he was slumped over the other day and his hand was stuck. And I went mad because there was a plate of food and he's not to eat in his room, but I think they were busy. And he couldn't reach because it was his eating hand. And they hadn't thought to sit him up so he could get to his food. And I worry myself sick because I visit him 4 times a week. And I worry myself sick that something that is unusual is that they do love him. They absolutely love him because he always smiles. But he will do, that's all he knows to do, is smile. He doesn't speak, he sings. He can still sing. And I don't get that, but it's a different part of the brain apparently. But music lifts him and we sing together and it's wonderful. And I do feel that I get my Gilly back sometimes when he does that. And this might sound really, really horrible, but I love him so much. But he isn't there anymore. When you get a diagnosis of something like cancer, you get a treatment program, don't you? And you know where you're going. You get a plan, and you get specialists looking after you. Dementia, you don't get anything. And we've had, we have had some stuff from the football authorities, but they don't see what the families are going through. And you say dementia sufferer. Well, to be honest, a lot of them aren't really suffering because they don't know. It's us that are suffering. It's us that are watching the person that they love turn into somebody that's not there anymore. And sometimes I wish he wasn't. And I don't judge me on this, but sometimes I think, why is he just sat there existing? Why? What's his quality of life? Why is he just there? And then he smiles at me, so it's okay. But, they should stand up. They should be damn well ashamed of themselves. They've got enough money to fund loads of blinking care homes. The police and the Actors Fund and the Fire Brigade and all other peoples have these homes. Why the hell can't football? What are they going to do with all that money? They just want to sweep it under the carpet. I'm angry. I am so damn angry. I want them to say sorry, and I want them to acknowledge that this has caused this degenerative illness within my husband. His brain's donated to Dr. Willis Stewart. But I don't know if he's got CTE or if he's just got Alzheimer's and dementia. I don't know. Not until after he's passed away. But that's how it is, isn't it? It's the nature of the disease. And I think I've said enough now, so thank you.
Vanessa, Christine, I mean, I can't even begin to put into words the power of what you've just said and the bravery, honestly, but all of our love to you and the family. Vanessa. Thank you, Vanessa.
Hi all. I'm Vanessa McLeod and I'm speaking on behalf of Sheila Parker. Probably not a lot of you know about her at the moment, but she was the very first England ladies captain in 1972. I've known Sheila Parker, MBE, for around 40 years and have become very good friends through playing football. Sheila's career started at Dick Kerr's Ladies FC, where she was 16 years old. The footballs in them days were the old Casey balls, which held a lot of water and were very heavy. Her footballing continued for many years, playing with various teams, and was the first women's football captain for England Ladies, where she got 36 caps. She continued to play for various clubs for nearly 30 years. Sheila was forced to retire from work due to her forgetting things that she has known for 48 years and loved her job as a receptionist. In the last 3 to 4 years, I noticed a decline in her ability to remember things. This has been a slow progress, and 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and heart failure. Sheila now suffers from short-term memory loss and cannot remember her footballing career or even getting the MBE. I don't know whether this was caused by heading the ball a lot in her playing days, but I don't think the weight and structure of the ball helped. Sheila is an icon for women's football, and it is sad that she cannot remember hardly any of it now. With the Lionesses' success in women's football, we must do everything we can to safeguard our future players. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. I think that is a really important contribution because we talk about the men's game, the money in the men's game. There were pioneers of women's football in this country, weren't there, who don't get the same recognition and who don't have the same structures of support as well. And I think the fact that you spoke today to that issue for Sheila is much appreciated. Thank you, Vanessa. Natalie.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. For those who don't know me, my name's Natalie Parks-Thompson, and my dad is Tony Parks, ex-footballer, coach and assistant manager. I know a lot of people in this room will have come across him during his time at Blackburn Rovers. I'm not really sure what else I can add following what Christine said, because it's just like hearing my story all over again. My dad spent most of his 40-year professional career with Blackburn Rovers, and he played a fundamental part of winning the Premiership trophy with Blackburn alongside Kenny Dalglish and Ray Harford in the early 90s. I first started noticing changes in Dad's behaviour following my mum's death. He was quiet, withdrawn, confused, and would forget the simplest things. Initially, I put it down to grief, but as time went on, it became clear that it wasn't just grief. In February 2019, my lovely dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Naively, I thought the diagnosis would open the door for support, not just for my dad, but for me too. Soon after diagnosis, the NHS discharged him back to his GP to just manage his symptoms. I just felt lost. Dad lived with me and very soon became totally reliant on me for everything. By 2020, I had to give up my teaching job to become his full-time carer. I was a full-time teacher and I went to £55 a week. Living through COVID was especially challenging, which we've heard. The isolation, my dad would get constantly angry about being kept inside and would try to escape as he didn't understand what was happening in the wider world. It was at that time I found out I was pregnant with my second child, and very much like Christine, had a safe space where I had to take my other child to on numerous occasions while my dad got physically angry. Anyone who knew my dad was the most down-to-earth, friendly, funny guy. Thinking of him being cross, it's so out of character. This is what Alzheimer's disease does to a person. Not knowing where to turn, I reached out to the PFA because I'd heard that they could possibly offer some support. And initially they did. Gordon Taylor has received a lot of bad press in recent years, but he did actually pay for some respite care for my dad while I went into hospital to have my daughter. I had to have a C-section. I had no option but to have a date where I had to go and deliver my baby so that I had someone else to care for my dad. There was just me. I'll be forever grateful for that support that they gave me at that time. When the PFA structure changed, I was filled with hope, like so many of us families, that things would change and that my dad would continue to get the support he deserved after giving his entire life to football. And he did. I missed out on so much of a child because my dad was at football. However, this wasn't the case, and I was constantly told that there was no funding available. In fact, the words the PFA often use, the PFA doesn't fund residential care, and I was told that regularly. And in my case, that just meant end of conversation. Fortunately, an amazing Blackburn fan took it upon himself to start a crowdfunder to raise some money for my dad as a way of saying thank you for his loyal service. An astounding £17,000 was raised, which enabled me to keep my dad in his care home for a further 3 months. So again, just think of the figures. £17,000 to me is that's more than I earn in a year. 3 months in a care home. As looking after Dad's needs was growing alongside my 2 young children, caring for him became impossible. The crowdfunder really did help, but it also helped because it raised the profile of dementia in football as it made it into the press and forced Blackburn Rovers to step in and to offer some limited financial assistance through their Football in the Community initiative. This took the pressure off for a while. Also, I thought, checking my inbox one day, I noticed an email for Mr. Klaus at the then PFA charity. The tone of the email and his aggressive manner severely affected my already fragile mental health. I feel myself shaking now, even thinking about it. I cried for days and was forced to take a good look at my kind of relationship with the PFA, and I just closed the door. I'd lost all trust and respect. So what is my dad like today? He's in full-time residential care. He's incontinent. He can't communicate. He can hardly walk. He's sad. He doesn't smile. And this Christmas, he no longer recognises me. Any glimmer of my lovely dad has been well and truly lost to this awful disease. His friends and family have all forgotten about him, and we are very much alone. We are no longer receive any support, and without the courage and perseverance of people like John Stiles, Judith Gates, I would feel as lost as I did on the first day he was diagnosed. The sad thing is, I'm not alone. There are so many families of ex-professionals that are struggling to meet the financial and emotional strain that living with dementia or CTE has put on them. Football Families for Justice really need your help. We need a positive change to ensure that our loved ones get the care they deserve. And for this and for many, it does mean help with financing full-time residential care. Thank you so much for listening.
Well, it's hard to know how to respond, isn't it, to the power of what we've just heard, everybody, and I guess we just all have to just process it. We'll all have our own sort of reactions to what we've heard. The floor is open now just for any other family members in the room who wanted to say something. There's no pressure to do so, but we didn't want this meeting to be a meeting where we exclude any voice that wants to be heard. As I say, it's not required in any way. Steve, is there anything you would just want to say on what we've been hearing this afternoon, just to take stock? If anyone wants to think about it and stick their hand up or indicate to me, it'd be great.
I'll just draw the parallels, by the way, unbelievably powerful stuff. Anyone who's gone through the loss of a loved one like I have through Alzheimer's and dementia, we can absolutely recognise all of those things, and to not be provided with the support is just unconscionable as far as I'm concerned. I'll just pick up on the thread. I think Tony said about the emotion in the room, and you're absolutely right. And from a legal perspective, emotion never carries. You can't win an argument in law on emotion, but you need to win over hearts and minds. And one of the things that we learned from a couple of the campaigns that we've been involved in, myself and Andy, and certainly on Hillsborough, you might remember that they tried to smear what happened at Hillsborough and tried to say it was the fans, basically it was their fault. And we had to clear that out the way so that we could relink that emotional element to the public, because they believed that it was they killed themselves. That was the argument. And I think that what we just heard from Christine, Vanessa and Natalie, it is so powerful that will win over people, because you need the public support to get any campaign from where it is to success. You need that emotional attachment. You need the public on your side. And to hear testimony like that, as powerful as it was and as painful as it was, because I saw you shaking, and I know that it's difficult for you to do them sort of things, but it gives you the human element, the human side of the story, and I think that's what will win people over. And then we'll try then to use them parliamentary processes that we were speaking about before, to use people like parliamentarians. And
Debbie was here. Oh, she gone? She had to go.
Debbie's had to go. But we'll use people like Debbie Abrahams. We'll use the others in Parliament. That thing called the all-party parliamentary group is really important to us. Look, there's loads of other things that you can probably associate with this, and I would never, ever try to argue. I'm not a neuroscientist, and I don't understand all of these things, but we need to keep it simple, I mean, you can overcomplicate these things, and this is, I think, sort of a standalone campaign. You need to get that in the public consciousness, and then you can build other things around it, and there has to be a strategy to do that, and hopefully with the support of, as I say, genuinely some of the game's biggest names and some of the people that you saw on the screen, and others that are watching this closely as well, who aren't unfortunately able to be here today. I think that you can build momentum and you can get people in Westminster to start listening to the very real difficulties that people are facing now, but also, of course, just try and stop people from having to face those in the future.
Brilliant, Steve. And I'm going to come to a colleague here, just on the point about the public understanding of an issue and then the public support that comes from that understanding of the issue. I think what we've just heard massively will help with that, because the injustice, you've always got to get to the heart of what is the injustice. When the public hears these days footballer, that triggers a certain thing about money and life. That's how because of the way the modern game is now. But we have to educate people again about what it was to be a footballer in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s. It was a different game, wasn't it? And that's where this injustice lies. The people who made it this global industry are not now in any way being, I'm saying anyway, because we've heard that there is some support given, but not. The injustice is that they are not remembered now and weren't remunerated at the time in the way that the game is now. And you have to sort of kind of bring the public's understanding of back to that, to then see the injustice that this industry that is so wealthy now has to remember its obligation to those who made it so, who built it. And that's the injustice. So when the football families are calling for that justice, that is the justice issue that we're dealing with here. So the gentleman there just indicated behind, actually.
So John's asked me to come today. I feel a bit of a fraud. I'm not a former footballer. I'm a failed footballer at a very early age. I'm also not as clever as Dr. Willie Stewart, but I'm an academic doctor. The single worst thing I've done in my career is to interview the families of people who have lost a loved one from some form of neurodegenerative disease. Sometimes I've sat there with people who are younger than I am, and I'm probably a bit younger than I look, or older than I look, either way. And they've lost teens who've taken their own life because of some form of brain injury from sport. To give you an idea that this happens to people at all ages, the youngest case of CTE that's been recorded is 17. And CTE can only be diagnosed post-mortem. So that means that someone who's 17 has lost their life due to playing sport. So this is such a massive issue for sport. I've said to John that we are seeing the tip of the iceberg here. There will be more and more cases at professional level, at grassroots level, where there's no care, where injuries happen. And for me, this needs to be considered not a sport problem. It is not about sport. This is a public health crisis. We will see so many people, not just those of you in the room, but at all levels of the game who are affected by this. And it isn't just the players, as we've heard, it's the families. This Christine story, I've heard that so many times. It's horrendous the amount of times I've heard a very similar story from the family of athletes. It's parents, it's wives, it's partners, it's the children who have to pick up the pieces. And I think I take the point that yes, there needs to be a legal case, but if you put people like Christine in front and tell those stories, you've got to be completely heartless not to be affected by that, because that is the human side of this that goes on. And I think that we need to get it past this being, like I say, not just a sport problem. This is affecting our society. Give you an idea, in the NFL, they have paid out currently, I just looked earlier, over $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion. It's a relatively small number of cases for that. And so when we're talking about £1 million as a care fund, that kind of puts it in perspective. So $1.4 billion paid out to just NFL players.
Really important point to put into the room.
Thank you very much. I just want to make a brief point, which did come up in one of the presentations, which there's a concept here that this is a historic problem due to the old, heavy leather footballs. And certainly when we were seeing people from Liverpool in the 90s with it, that's what we believed. But Willie Stewart alluded to this. He didn't bring it out very much. It's a lighter ball moving much faster causes exactly the same problem. This is not going to go away. It's not just a problem from the old heavy West footballs. It still exists with a modern ball moving much faster.
Another crucial point into the room that we've not heard before. It's kind of a last call, really. A last call for anyone who wants to say something. Alex, great to see you with us this afternoon.
Thanks a lot. When I signed pro, 61, 62, no one saw this coming. No one saw this coming. And Professor Stewart, they mentioned about goalkeepers, whether I was a good goalkeeper or not makes no difference. But I played for Millwall. And I'm not just pointing out Millwall, but you had to look after yourself. There was no health and safety, nothing at all. And you had to look after yourself right out through the game. I used to get charged, pushed, but hey, I used to do the same back as much as I could. But it affected so many players. And like until the 80s, I think it was 1980 that the ball was changed to not absorb anything. But we never expected any of that. And like I said, there was no health and safety then. The game's changed, the pitches we played on, it's all pass. There was only 15 in a squad. There were no substitutes. And I speak to people at Old Trafford now when I go around, and when they ask me about things, and I mention there was no, we talk about there was no substitutes. They don't remember that. And the only thing I can think of, if anything can be done, and I don't know what any of the other players think here, is, and families, if some organisation, okay, let's indicate PFA, but that hasn't gone down very well at the moment, but if they're going to get 6 or 7 or 8 old care homes that are not being used, bought up, they wouldn't lose money, and players could be put in them all around the country, and be with players, ex-professional footballers, which will help them get through their life. That's my idea.
That absolutely.
Thank you very much.
If the football authorities came together, if they come together and they said in some of the major cities throughout England that they would fund dementia care, then I think they'd be cheered from the rooftops. And I think that even, we say that they're not putting enough in grassroots and not putting in all. I think everybody, doesn't matter where you're from in the game, would be supportive of that. And perhaps that's one of the recommendations that will come from this campaign.
Yep.
That they should come together and they should provide that care right the way across the whole of the country.
Well, we're coming to the sort of conclusion, really. And Imogen or Saba, and John, you rightly praised. They've been brilliant, actually, Imogen and Saba at the back, who have helped bring everything together today with John and Football Families for Justice. But if you could distribute the sheet of paper. Everyone's got them. Okay. So we are coming to the, because obviously you'll all be thinking, yes, agree with that. What next? And this is where we're kind of coming to where we take this, Steve, isn't it? And you've got the note here, and we'll both need to refer to this. And I think, as has been said this afternoon, this is a backward-looking issue to a considerable degree, isn't it? How do we do right by the people who made this game what it is, and the game that we all love so much? How do we do right by those people and their families? And that's an issue that's got to be done properly and properly recognised. But there is a future-facing issue here, as we just heard a moment ago. Have we yet fully got this right? We saw the new advice around the grassroots and heading, but I don't think we just heard. I think we're not there, are we? No one in this room wants to fundamentally change the game, do they? And take things out of the game that were important to the game. But we're going to have to address something here, aren't we? Like boxing did. What is the right way to address this in a way that doesn't lose the essence of the game that we love? And that can't be avoided, I'm afraid, can it? Because we've just heard that the modern balls, they may be very light, but my goodness, they don't half. And when you've headed one, we've played still, don't we? And you have it, you can feel it in your forehead for a few days afterwards. You know what I'm saying? So, you've never won a header in your life. I scored a header at Anfield, you might remember. 1 yard. Well, it doesn't matter, I'll take it. Anyway, we'll leave that. We'll leave that where that is. So we're kind of now bringing you to what we are going to advise to you as a way forward. And, obviously what we'll be seeking, if you could read the sheet of paper that you've been given, what we are going to kind of ask for today is some sort of endorsement from the room as a way forward. So there is obviously a big debate about to happen in Parliament. Well, it is happening. The Football Governance Bill is currently in the House of Lords, and it will be going through its stages in the House of Lords for probably the next 2 or 3 months, up until Easter, I would probably say. And then after Easter, it will come to the House of Commons. So that's a big thing. We've never had in our lifetimes substantial. There was the legislation of the 80s, but that related to football disorder, didn't it? And some of the measures we strongly still disapprove of, the kind of things that were done in that time to football supporters, ID cards, you might remember, and all of those debates. But some of that legislation from then is still there. There has never been a piece of legislation that deals with the totality of the game, and crucially, the finance of the game. But that bill is in Parliament now. It's called the Football Governance Bill. And it's the bill that is being discussed in relation to a regulator for football. But also it's the opportunity to place obligations on the football authorities, indeed on all bodies related to the administration of the game. And that would include the Players' Union as well. So what Steve and I are proposing is that we work with lawyers, and bear in mind the Hillsborough law is coming through Parliament at the moment, and so we work with lawyers to help us draft legislation. So if you look under the second point first, I'll come back to the first point. The second point is that we seek your support today to develop an amendment to the Football Governance Bill that places a statutory duty on the football authorities and the Players' Union to develop a care and support scheme for players who develop dementia or other neurodegenerative conditions linked to their football career, and a requirement that it be agreed with players past and present and their families. So that scheme would have to, they can't just do it and that's it. It would have to be signed off and agreed with everybody. It has to be a scheme that meets the needs of Christine, Natalie, Vanessa, everyone who's spoken today, and all of you in the room. So that's one proposal. It becomes a statutory requirement to develop, you may remember what I called before, that industrial injuries compensation scheme. This one would be funded by this industry, because I don't think, as John said, there's a justification for taxpayers funding here. That's not to say that the NHS provided care needs to be fitted within that. We're talking about what football needs to pay for on top of that to give people the dignity and the families the support that they need. But then beyond that, in point 3, we're widening that out to say that support scheme should be at the heart of a wider national strategy for football and dementia, or should I say football, dementia and other neurodegenerative conditions, that secures the safety and long-term health of all players, male and female, at all levels of the game, grassroots as well. So that would be in relation to the advice given to young players, and that wider national strategy would have to be presented to the UK government and signed off by them. And obviously the financial support scheme we're talking about will be at the heart of that strategy, but it's a recognition that has to be a more of a future-facing sort of approach here as well, that looks to the players of now and the advice that they're being given. So we would propose, Steve and I, to develop the technical legal clauses that would go into the Football Governance Bill that would deliver the financial care and support scheme for you, the industrial injuries compensation scheme, and the requirement to have a strategy, comprehensive strategy, signed off by the government as well, and the chief medical officer and other senior players in the government, that deals with the situation going forward. And we would then take that amendment, and with the support of Debbie Abrahams and others, we're proposing with you to go to Parliament in the spring to launch the campaign for that amendment alongside John and Football Families for Justice, so that Parliament is presented with the opportunity to vote for a comprehensive solution to an issue that has kind of developed and grown, but is still miles from where it needs to be. And what we would like to do with you is to replicate this gathering that we've had today in one of the committee rooms of the Houses of Parliament, so that we can hear some of the testimony again in front of MPs, members of the House of Lords, and then we present the amendment that we all want to see included in that bill, requiring the football authorities to deliver the justice for the football families that we want to see. And then together, we build that campaign together, and each of you could write to your own MPs to say, please support the amendment. And we will identify a member of Parliament to be the champion of that amendment in Parliament. Could be Debbie, other people will want to be involved as well. So that's our proposal to you, everybody. We thought carefully about it. We are drawing, as Steve said, on all of our experience in the Hillsborough campaign, but also infected blood that we've both been involved in. We're involved with the nuclear test veterans, aren't we? So we have a lot of experience to draw on here. We think that's the right way to elevate the issues that you've discussed today. And I hope, maybe Steve or John, I just hope to recommend it to you anyway, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the fact that most parliamentarians are football supporters. The vast majority are, and they like to associate with footballers and football clubs. And so our ask would be that as many of you and your colleagues could support us in that, because you being there will be an attraction to get MPs there. I'll guarantee if you get representation from, the big clubs, the very fact that you're there, MPs will want to come see because they want a photo with you. So your presence is really important to this, because there are 650 MPs and we want as many as possible to understand what this is about, because as it goes through the parliamentary ping pong, it's called, it goes backwards to the House of Lords and the House of Commons and all of that sort of stuff. We want people to understand what it's about. And you can do that. Honestly, you could provide the opportunity that people down there would absolutely love. There are plenty of causes down there where people are trying to get one of you, perhaps, or somebody of your stature to the meeting so that they can attract MPs. Just imagine if we had 30, 40, 50 or more former footballers, we would smash it, honestly. And that's how you can get people on your side and get that momentum I spoke about earlier.
You're one of the most powerful lobbies that they will ever face. So let's get organised, everybody. Get organised now. Get together. Get in fighting mode, because we are going to have to fight for this. But that's where we're going to get to from today, and we're ready to do that, aren't we? With you. That's what we've got to do. Get everybody involved. Everybody ready. This is a big year. If it's going to be fixed, it's going to be fixed this year, and that's the commitment that we're making. And Alex, you gave a great idea there. All of that, all of your ideas can come into the strategy. The wider, there's the kind of principle of this, but then there's the strategy that comes from it. And taking up all of that will make the power of this really. Imagine if there was a care home of that kind in every city, or a care campus of some kind where former footballers, that would be a visible sign of the football giving back to the people who built it. And I loved what you said. So, John, we're recommending, Steve and I, from us to you, to Football Families for Justice. This is our proposal.
Can I have a show of hands who's going to back us? We're all with you. We're all with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming this afternoon. Thank you to colleagues in the media as well for showing such a great deal of interest in what we're doing. We will now take that endorsement and thank you for it, and we will start working with some of the friends we still have in Parliament. We do still have some friends in Parliament, don't we, Steve? One or two. We will find one of our remaining friends in Parliament, and we will get an event together, and we'll work via John to tell you when that will be. March, April. We'll have to sort of see how it works out, but that's going to be the kind of roughly the time. We'll get the amendment developed in the in the interim. Now you've supported that idea. So we'll be going with that in our hands, and that football governance bill will be about to arrive in the House of Commons. So this isn't like, oh, where's this going? I can't see it. Well, hang on, it's coming to something very, very real very soon. We won't get a better opportunity, everybody, than this. So work on that basis. As Steve said, we want you all there. When we've got that amendment, we'll send it to you so you can all see it. We want you all there. We fight this one together, and we'll win this one together. Thank you very much, everybody.
Just brilliant, thank you. And we have a lot of press media here, lads, especially our celebrities, some legends here today. They might want to have an interview with you. If you wouldn't mind giving them an interview, we'd really appreciate it. Okay.